Alrighty, thank you all for coming to our first program of the new year. I'm Summer, I'm the curator here at the museum. Before we get started, everybody please take a second to turn off or silence your cell phones so we don't have any disruptions. As for announcements, we just opened a new temporary exhibit at the museum a few weeks ago entitled 1821, Florida Becomes a U.S. Territory. It explores Florida's transfer from Spain to the U.S. through the Adams-Onis Treaty. This exhibit will be on view through March, so be sure to check it out while you can. And then on Sunday, February 13th, we will be having a Victorian tea in celebration of Valentine's Day. Contact Thea if you would like to purchase tickets, and her card is at that back table. As for upcoming programs, our January 3rd on 3rd will be on the 21st, and we'll have Dickie Anderson speak about the new edition of her book, Great Homes and Churches, Great Homes of Fernandina. Now called Great Homes and Churches, it features 9 historic churches around town. For our February Brown Bag Lunch on February 2nd, we will have John Polsinelli, who will speak about his upcoming book, St. Michael's Parish, which details the history of St. Michael's Church. So that's it for announcements, but today we have Ronda Outler. Ronda is a physicist who spent her 30-year career in nuclear power. Upon retirement, she and her husband transitioned from a vacation home into a full-time residency in Fernandina. Ronda's experience with digital media storage and her love of history brought her to the museum. She is the museum archivist and has been with the museum for 2.5 years. So everyone please welcome Ronda.
Hi, good morning and thank you for coming. Today is going to be Genealogy 101. So I see some faces in here that I know have quite a bit of experience in genealogy. But today is really to get you started in finding your roots and why it's important, and just some tricks of the trade and some of the things that I found in my 25 years of doing this that might help you out. We will have a brief presentation. We'll have a question and answer session at the end. So if you have any questions, if you would hold those to the end, and we'll be glad to get to those. Okay. All right, so why should you find your roots? Why is that important? Well, you want to know where you came from, right? You want to know about your family and what they struggled to do to get to where we are today. It's also the best way to close a generational gap. So how many of you have grandchildren that are this the whole time they're at your house? Okay. So if you could get them interested in genealogy, it's a way to get them off the phone. It's a way for this generation to speak to the other generation about what has happened and the family stories and the things that you cannot replace if you don't capture them today. So it's really a great way to close a generational gap. And the best thing is a treasure hunt, right? You don't have to get dirty. You don't need a shovel. You don't have to go to Oak Island or any place like that. So it's a story of you. So that's what's really important, is to know where you came from. All right, so I'm going to preach a little at the front. The first thing we're going to talk about is documentation. If you're going to do research, it's very important to keep your documentation. Because if you don't document where you got your facts from, you cannot replicate the work. And if you do a great job of a particular line in your family and you decide, oh, I want to publish this, then there's a lot of work to go back and find the sources and tie the sources back to the information. So if you start at the front with good documentation and good organization, it'll help you in the long run. All right, so how do you document? So this right here is probably the best thing to come along to genealogy research ever. When I first started, you had to take a tape recorder, you had to take a camera, you had to take film or digital media, so whatever. So there's a lot of things that this now replaces, because this is a photograph. This is a recorder, so you can interview someone and document and hear their voice again. This is also a great way to share information through emails and texts and that kind of stuff. So if you don't have a smartphone, it might be a good time to get one, because it's a great asset in doing this research. So take photographs, take notes, hard copies, digital media scans, etchings and headstones. How many of you have ever etched a headstone? It's not really something because you can take a picture of it, but etching a headstone is just, it's very interesting to do because you see it come to life and not just a photograph. So if you've never etched a headstone, I encourage you to do that. If you have digital media, what's the number one rule? Always back it up. Always have a second copy. How many of you have ever had a laptop die? Or had a hard drive crash? Okay. And if that's the only copy, then potentially 25 years worth of your work is gone. So definitely have copies. It's very heartbreaking to lose that kind of work. So I can't emphasize that enough. Make sure you have a backup copy. So how are you going to organize all this information? Because it is a ton of paper, it's a ton of research, it's a ton of documents. So a few things that you can use. So if you're a paper person, you can go to just a file box. Portable file boxes are great because you can take them with you. And if you have a question about, oh, what was great-grandfather's middle name, because I think I found a record that goes along with that, you can pull your file box and you can open it up and you can find the information. I recommend doing one of these for each side of the family you work for. So if you mix them in, then it just becomes a hot mess. I just recommend you have a box for each. I have 4 of these and 2 file cabinets. Hush. My husband thinks I have too much. You can create family tree worksheets. So family tree worksheets, there is a pile of them on the table as you exit the room. So if you'd like a family tree worksheet, please take those with you, because I'm going to tell you a little bit about filling those out. But family tree worksheets are great because you can see 2 to 3 generations on one page, and that's very helpful, very helpful. Online tools. So we're going to talk a little bit about the online tools that are available. Now, I'm not here trying to get you to buy an Ancestry.com or a Heritage.com subscription. So, it's just out there, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use it. And then Genealogy Software. So have any of you used Genealogy Software, like Family Tree Maker? So you have, okay. It's a great tool. And if you have software that marries up with an online service, such Family Tree Maker and Ancestry are joined together, and you can upload from Ancestry to Family Tree Maker and vice versa. So whatever software you purchase, see what your online platform support is for that, so that you can upload that media and have it again. There's an app for that, right? Have it on your phone so that when you're traveling and you're doing this research, it's very easily accessible. So just make sure that you look for that before you buy something. All right, so here's some worksheets. What this allows you to do is start with you. So there's me, father, mother, grandfather, great-grandfather. So it allows you to have 3 or 4 generations at a glance. And I recommend that you print these out or make copies of the ones that I've provided on the table. I'm sorry, you have them in front of you. Great. Make copies of these and take them with you when you go do research. Sometimes pulling this out will save you going down a rabbit trail and wasting 30 minutes worth of time because you've got the wrong middle name for your great-great-grandfather. So very good tool to have just for documentation. There are also online services that allow you to upload the names, and you can see the one on the left is kind of fancy. It's pretty. So they will allow you to publish a poster that you can hang on the wall. So yeah, there's a lot of services that genealogy is a big business now, big business. So if you do a lot of work and put a nice tree together and you want to put this on your wall in the dining room, then there are services out there that can help you do that. Now, the quick and dirty method, because most of us have a laptop, you can do a table in Word. And there's a generational tree method. So you just start with whatever your highest generation that you know, and then inset the next generation is generation 2, the next generation is generation 3, 4, and this is Microsoft Office. So as long as you keep your Office updated, you will never lose this information. I prefer this method for portability, but you also have to decide what all you want to put in this, because you can put a lot of information or you can put just the facts. So you really have to make a determination of what you want to use in your trees before you start this paperwork. All right, so now we're going to talk about research sources. Where do I find information? So this is probably the hardest thing when you get started to know where to look. So who's the first person you should ask?
A parent.
A parent, a grandparent, family, right? Because who knows your family better than your family? So start with the people you know. Do interviews and oral histories. Look in Bibles. Look in photo albums and scrapbooks. I can't tell you how many birthdays I found because I had a photo with somebody, just a picture of somebody's birthday cake, and the year was on the cake, and I knew when the photo was taken, and so I can do the math and back calculate, right? We can figure out the birthday. So scrapbooks are great, and if any of you are scrapbookers in here, then you are doing a great service to the next generation of your family, because having that information where you can open a book and see it is just a blessing if you're doing this kind of research. So I encourage you to look through family Bibles and photo albums. All right, so what do we have locally? Some people don't think about it, but churches. Churches is a good resource because people have letters of organization in that church. If you're a member of that church, you have a letter in that church. At least you do in the Baptist, and that's what we are in our family, we're Baptist. So we have letters in the church, and so you can go back and find out when that person joined the church. And sometimes there's very valuable information in that will help you find your parents, your grandparents, distant relatives, church directories, photographs, wonderful resource. So a lot of people don't think about churches as a good place to go get information. Cemeteries. Now we all know to go to cemeteries, right? So how many of you have ever been tromping around in the mud at a cemetery? My husband says my little girl learned to play kickball in the cemetery because we did a lot of that when she was little.
Grew up in the cemetery.
Right. So if you've ever done that, you're going to get a little muddy. But sometimes seeing the actual gravestones and taking photographs of the gravestones brings it back to why you're doing what you're doing, right? Why it's important. There's also Find a Grave, which has done a great job in mapping out many of our cemeteries, and that can help you do things online and not have to go to the physical graveyards. But I do encourage you, if you have the time, to go see it, because it ties you back to who you are and where you came from. Courthouses. Now, courthouses, of course, with COVID, we've had some restrictions about our availability to go to a courthouse. But courthouses have a wealth of information. They have tax records, they have land deeds, marriage license. There's just a ton of information at a courthouse. So if you are near the courthouse of the family member you're trying to look for, then go to the courthouse. Ask them, can I see records for blah, 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 or can I see the marriage rolls from this date to this date, because I suspect I have a family member that was married and they may have a record here. So that's a good place to get information. Newspapers and obituaries. So obituaries will give you so much information, because most people will say, this person has passed away. They were the son or the daughter of, and they'll give the parents. They are survived by, and they'll give the siblings. Also the children, the grandchildren. So if you can find obituaries, I tell you what, they're not graded. They will not tell you the date. Unless you find it published in the newspaper and you can get the newspaper date. You just can't get the date, because they just usually don't give you the date. But they give you names, and that's half the battle, is finding out who you're related to and how many kids they have and where they are from, that kind of information. So obituaries is a good one. All right, and then online tools. So if you can get to the internet, you can get to a wealth of information now. When I started 25 years ago, RootsWeb was the biggest piece of information out there, and you could get a few census records on county web pages, but not like you can today. So if you have Ancestry or MyHeritage or the GenWeb project, there's several of them out there that just have all kinds of information they digitize and make available, that you can keyword search by a last name and a date range, and it'll pop up 30 people that have that same name. So it's important to know where you're from, right? Because if there's a Mark Smith you're related to in Georgia, and there's a Mark Smith in Boston, chances are, if you're a Georgia folks, you're not going to be a Boston person. So you've really got to have an idea of where you migrated from. That's why it's important to talk to the old folks, because they're the ones who know, right? So it's really important to get that information so that when you are looking through the resources, there's enough structure there that you can say, yes, that is my relative, or say, no, that's not my relative, because we never had anyone that lived in Tennessee. You may find that they've migrated and you didn't know the story. So sometimes you find out along the way, oh, my great-great-grandmother was from Pennsylvania, but she moved to South Carolina when she was young, and all I've ever known was she lived in South Carolina. But as I did research, I found out she was born in Pennsylvania. So you'll find a lot that way. If you can get online and you can Google genealogy research, you will have 300 hits to look through. So it's a great resource that's out there available to you. All right, let's talk about organizations. So how many of you know that we have a genealogy society on Amelia Island? Okay, so Rob, stick your hand at Rob. Rob is here. He's a representative from the Genealogy Society here, and they will help you do research. So if you have just a need, you can sometimes go to that facility and say, hey, I can't find information on this. Can you help me? So if you have research that you need to do in a specific area, let's say you're here and you need to go to South Carolina, sometimes you can write emails online. You can get on their webpage and find information and never have to travel. But now that most of us are retired or maybe just have a second job that's a few days a week, travel's something we can do. When COVID releases us all to go back into the real world, it's a great opportunity just to go take a day trip or a weekend trip to do genealogy research, yeah, and also see some of the sites. So it's a great thing to tie together. Libraries. So we also have libraries in most every town, and some places have good genealogy research material. Some people have just a few things, so you need to look around in your local libraries and find out what they have and how it can help you do your research. Documentation that's available. So again, sources for county history publications. So how many of you have ever been in our library and seen the books that we have on the history of Amelia Island? Okay, right? So for the majority of the research that I did on my husband's family, it was Montgomery County. So there's a beautiful book on tombs in Montgomery County, and you see the tabs? That means we have people in here, right? So these books are great because you sometimes can get photographs of people you don't have, and you can get stories, because a lot of times the people that do the research for this don't just get the name or the place, they get the stories. And so if you get to doing research in Baker County, here's a Baker County book, and see, this is a big one. So this was a great resource when I was working on my mother's side, because most of us hail from Baker County, Georgia, and you can see the tabs, right? So that lets you know I have people in here. But this one was really great because they told you the stories and what they did for a living and who they were related to. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can see what other people have done and take advantage of these kinds of books that are out there available. There are also publications in general, so for Southern families, because like I said, we're mostly from Georgia, there's a publication called Great Southern Families, lots of tabs, right? So you can see that I've worked these books quite a bit. There are plenty of publications out there. You don't have to go buy them. Many genealogy societies have copies of these. You can sometimes buy them online, if you have a very specific book that you want to see. So I encourage you to use these because they will help with your research and take a little of the labor out of every person that you're trying to add to your tree. So those are available out there. All right, census records. I probably could do a whole hour on census records. But of the documentation that's out there available to you, census records are probably the most valuable. Now, census records started in 1790. And in the 1790 census, they documented head of household. So John Smith, head of household. And then there was a number count of the number of females that lived in the household, the number of males that lived in the household, the number of domestic servants that lived in the household. So you didn't get anything except head of household. It got better, thank goodness. As you travel through time, every 10 years a new census would come up, and then they started listing the wives. So we actually, hey, the wives made the list. And then they started listing the children. So then the kids came in. Well, then they started actually putting the birth dates of the children, or at least the age they were at the time the census was taken. So, of course, back do the math, right? You can figure out at least maybe what year they were born, because some of them even say they were 10 years and 3 months old at the time of this census. So you can back calculate from the time the census was taken and figure out how old the children are. So the census records probably is a great place to start. But again, you gotta know where you're from. So you got to talk to the grandmas, the grandpas, that kind of stuff, and kind of get the story of, well, we live in Fernandina, but actually we were from North Carolina, and we migrated there from wherever, because you need to know what counties to search. If you have online tools like Ancestry or MyHeritage, you put the name in, and they'll throw you up 100 people with the same name. So again, you have to know where you're from to figure out the person that really is related to you. Military service records. How many of you were in the military? Okay. Do they have a piece of paper on you?
Yeah.
Do they have a bunch of paperwork on you? Did they have your whole life story pretty much? Yeah, right. So if you can access military records, my grandfather was in the Navy, and then he was in the Seabees, and so my aunt has written the Navy and requested information about his tours when he was out during the war and what he did. Also, when she did that, there were medals that he was due that he never received, so we now have his medals from that. So getting those military records, if you have a military family, it's really very beneficial to contact the appropriate people to get that information, because they have the information that you filled out when you enlisted, and they also have when you stopped being in the military and what your last port of call was, so then you can kind of get an idea of where they went from there. And you might get a few medals or even a flag that you didn't know you were supposed to have. So military records are good. Ship's passenger logs. How many of you had parents or grandparents, great-grandparents, not parents, but had relatives that came over on the Mayflower? Well, there's a Mayflower list out there. Ellis Island has records that are out there. So there are subscription capabilities for many of these things that are out there. Sometimes whatever service you subscribe to has those for free. Sometimes there might be a small fee to add that to your subscription. But you can see if your family came over and came through Ellis Island, you can find the documentation of when they came through in the year. So just tons of resources out there. And then, of course, other family trees. So when you do the work, you share the work. So the biggest thing I can warn you about is don't trust other people's work. Verify your sources. Because really, who's the most important person in your tree? Your direct line, right? Cousins and second cousins and third cousins. You might put them in there, right? They might be an aside, but who are you really going to make sure the dates are right? Your mama, your grandmama, your great-grandmama, your daddy, your great-granddaddy. You're going to make sure those facts are right. So if you get someone else's family tree and you're a second or third cousin in their tree, you might really check those facts. And why is it important to check the facts? Because they may have it wrong. How hard is old handwriting to read? Okay, so we're all of an age, we were taught cursive in school, right? George, you were taught cursive in school, right? George is probably the youngest one in here. This generation has not been taught cursive writing. They're not going to be able to read a 1901 document, I'm just going to tell you, because it's hard enough knowing the cursive language to read it. But it's very hard to read numbers and letters and making sure you have spellings right. So that's why it's good to go and actually see the record. We have in our family tree that I did for my husband, we have a date that has been reported wrong for years. And it's because the handwriting was really poor in the document. But if you go look at the notation above that entry and the notation below that entry, you can see the date is not correct. And so it not only clears up a date, but it also clears up, well, how was he married to this one and had kids at this date when we thought he was married to this one? So seeing the real documentation sometimes is very beneficial. Now, Ancestry and many of the others will actually pull the record and let you view it. You can also tie it to your family tree so you have that documentation. So there's nothing more thrilling to pull my grandfather's World War II draft registration card, see his signature, see his brown hair and what he weighed, just because that's a snapshot of who he was. And to know that he was 135 pounds at one time, that's just not right, because he was not 135 pounds by the time I came along. So it's just very interesting to see that snapshot in time from that actual record. So going back to the records is key. Always, always verify your sources. Even some of the nice publications from people that get paid to do this for a living, they're still mistakes. Because again, it's important as to who you are and your family tree, and all the other people that might be related to you are nice to have in your tree, but you might not do the hard effort to get the data exactly correct. All right, so let's talk about some of the places you can go locally. How many of you have been to the Nassau County Library in the genealogy section there? How many even knew? Well, I know you have. How many of you knew that we had a section in the library here? Okay. So we have, surprisingly, we have a good collection of documents and books in the library here. It is somewhat regional because most of the collections usually are, but there are bigger text, like the land lotteries. There's a whole book on the land lotteries, and so if you had someone that was able to get land through the land lottery, there's a book in there on the land lottery, and that's not just Nassau County. So you can go to the genealogy library here and probably learn about somebody that you might be related to in North Carolina, because there is a book about North Carolina in there. So always start locally, because hey, it doesn't cost you a lot of gas, and you can kind of hit that anytime you want. Jacksonville Public Library, another big resource. Now, I've never had the opportunity to go inside, because when I really started having some free time, of course, COVID came, and that library was not available to go inside. I will tell you there is quite a nominal fee to get a library card if you are not a Duval County resident. So getting that research online is also a little bit limiting, unless you want to throw $100 at Jacksonville. So, but once the library opens back up, you can visit there. And from what I understand, Miss Brenda, who works here sometimes, she says they have a really nice collection. So that would be a good day trip and a nice lunch, and then look through a few old books while you're out. The State Archives of Florida in Tallahassee. Again, pretty close, not a bad day trip. And if you want to go over to Tallahassee and see what they have, I do recommend before you make the trip, though, visit their webpage and see what they have available to you. If they have the ability to search your surname, it might can tell you if they have any books that you might be interested in looking at. So save yourself a trip if they really don't have anything that helps you and your family. Brian Lang Historical Archives. This is in Woodbine, Georgia. This is quite an interesting collection. I'm going to go spend a couple of days there and just see what they have. I understand they have ship logs back from the 1700s. So if any of your family were boat captains, there might actually be ship logs that are available for you to see there. Ladson Genealogy Library. How many of you have ever been to Vidalia, Georgia? Yeah, a few people have, right? Okay, so Vidalia is 2.5-hour drive from here. But I will tell you, that is the most impressive genealogy library I have ever been in. So Mr. Ladson was quite a wealthy man. I don't know how he made his first dollar, but I think he had it. And he invested most of his time in doing genealogy research. Now, you have to remember that he did this research before there was the internet. Does someone have an alarm that we'll take a second? It might be something other than a phone. I just want to make sure nobody has a monitor. That's okay. I just want to make sure no one has anything that they need to address. But as you see, it's quite extensive. It's a large place, and there are rare book collections that are just to die for. Microfilm, quite a lot there. So if you would like to visit that library, you can actually go online to G.A. Pines, because when he passed away, he donated all of the resources of that library to the Ohoopee Regional System, which is Toombs, Montgomery, Wheeler County, Georgia. And all of that is now indexed on G.A. Pines. So you can go see if you have a family book, such as the Outlaw Genealogy, because we were outlaws before we were outlers. And this book is all about our family. And this takes me back to 1504. If I can find one guy, there's one guy. There's that one guy. And when we can tie him in, we're back to 1504. And he's done the work for me. So that's really nice. So I do encourage you, if you really get serious about it and want a good place to go and take a day to do research, that's a great place. Can also give you a couple of good places to have lunch while you're there. All right, so where else could you possibly get resources? Maybe 10 feet that way? So we at the library, we at the museum and our research library have quite a lot of information for you to go through. We have biographies, cabinets that have 450 files in them. So if you happen to be from this area, and you happen to be one of the older families here, I can load you up with information. So just come Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., and I will show you everything we have. And of course, the A.L. Lewis Museum at American Beach. So if you have relatives that are tied in through the American Beach area, they have a wealth of information. And I do understand we're opening when?
Hopefully soon.
In the next month or so. So there is a desire to try to get that back open. Georgia also works there part-time, and she's been working with them to get that museum back open. So hopefully within the month or so, we hope to have that one back open as a resource to the county. And so I encourage you to go see the information they have as well. So as I said, we have a bunch of stuff here. I have 466 biography files. And that's a lot of information. Sometimes I actually have an entire family tree in the folder. Sometimes I just have documents that have been in the newsletter, or sometimes I have an obituary, or I have photographs. So there's quite a lot that I have just in the biographies cabinet alone. And one of our initiatives this last year has been to scan all of that in. And so beginning next month, George and I are going to make a big effort in publishing that to our webpage. So you can go in through Past Perfect, which is our access to all of our archives, and you'll be able to see the contents of a folder on Louis R. Reed, if you're kin to Louis R. Reed, or any of the ones that we have in the biographies cabinet. We have Census Records, we have land lottery books here, so we also have resources that you can look through. We have local phone directories. Now, whoever thought the phone book would be a great thing to look through? Guess what? It's really fun because you can say, oh, well, they lived on 8th Street, and then they moved to 10th Street. So you actually can maybe go see a house that your great-great-grandparents owned. We also have maps, and we have deeds. We have tons of information in the archives. So I encourage you, if you are from this area or have ties to this area, visit our webpage, go to the online resources, and check it out. Keyword search can get you into a lot of information if you're from this area. I have probably, I would say, 20 published family researches. The families have actually brought their research and published it, put it in our archives. So it's available if you're kin to any of those people. Half the work may be done for you. All you've got to go do is verify, 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 right? And again, if anybody has any questions when we get through on how to get onto Past Perfect, my card is in the back of the room, and on the back there's instructions on how to access our online archives. And almost everything we have is represented in Past Perfect. Now, it may not be the entire manuscript, or it may not be the entire collection. And if it's a book, it's not going to be the entire book. But it will tell you in a brief summary of what the book's about, who the key people are, so you can see if you're tied into any of that information. All right, so how do you start the voyage? So, okay, I'm ready to do this. How am I going to figure out? So, first of all, you've got to pick a surname. You've got to decide if I'm going to go just straight up the tree and just do the line that directly impacts me, or if I'm going to get the cousins and the second cousins and the third cousins, if I'm going to do the wives and the grandmothers and all that kind of stuff. So you have to make a plan. You have to figure out what you want to collect, because there's tons of data out there. Just imagine if you go Google yourself all the information you can see. So the things that I feel that were important for me: birth dates, death dates, who they married, and when they married them, and the kids they had. Those are the 5 things I set out to fulfill for everyone in the outlaw tree when we started doing Chris's family. You can, of course, add records, naval records, or if they were in the Civil War, from a muster roll, what division they were in. So there's tons of information that you can add. So I encourage you to start out simple, and then once you kind of get the framework done, then you can start adding in all the fluff. But the fluff's really where the fun stuff is, because that's where you get the family stories to pass on to the next generation. Write down what you know. So you'd be surprised when you sit down with a piece of paper how much of your family you know. I've been blessed with knowing 5 generations of my family. And I can write down not all the brothers and sisters, but I can at least write down my line. And I know a little bit about all the way back 5 generations in my mother's side. And so that's really what drove me to do the genealogy for Chris's family, is when I married in, there's a bunch of them. And I didn't know any of them. And I said, well, how better to know who they are than to get a document that gives me all their names. And so he would ask me at reunions, okay, who's that? Whose child is that? So I became the family historian for both sides, which was pretty good. Search for photos and documents in your own archives. You can look back even on your phone, Christmas pictures taken 5 years ago. And you might have a great picture of your grandmother there. If she no longer is with us, then you want to keep that photograph, right? So we're going to talk about doing an interview. Now, you might not think of it as an interview. You might just think about it as a table discussion with your grandmother or your great-grandmother, or if you're the grandmother or the great-grandmother. And you take the grandson, the grandchild, and say, come here and let me tell you about this. But if you're the one doing the interview, take a recording device. It can be your phone. If they don't want to be video, just turn the picture part off and just record. It can be a recording device that we have similar to this. If you happen to have an old tape recorder, it could be that. So just whatever you choose to use. Take your family tree worksheets, because as they start spitting out names, you could start writing those in. and that really helps you frame up where you're going to take your next step. I can't emphasize this enough. Ask what nicknames they went by. How many of you have people in your family that go only by a nickname? I have an uncle, it's a great-great-uncle actually, and he was always called Uncle Biggin, and I don't know why. And that's a very southern name, right? Biggin. Come to find out when I did my research, he was the older of two brothers, and he was the big one, and then there was a little one. And so when little one passed away from a childhood disease, there was still Biggin, and he is still to this day goes by Biggin. So if you don't ask for the nicknames and you start asking your family tree, you're not going to know, because you don't know them as John Smith Jr. You might know them as Uncle Jay. So know what people call the people in their family, because that can really help a lot. Another question that's important is, are there any children that didn't live to adulthood? Because sometimes you'll find when you get into the old censuses, there'll be a child that's in one census and then not in the other. And in the 10-year span, they could have grown up and moved out into their own home, but it also could be that child's passed away. So if you know of people that lost children early, because we've had many childhood diseases, influenza, yellow fever, different things that have impacted polio, the ability for children to grow to adulthood. So that's something to ask if you know of children that didn't live to adulthood, because that'll also help you add people to your tree that might otherwise be missed. Another big point, how many of you have a shoebox of people 2 generations ago you don't know who they are? Okay? So when you get to that interview with the eldest person in your family, take that box with you. Take a Sharpie. Say, Grandma, who is this? Probably the best time I ever spent was during a hurricane. We all evacuated back to Georgia. My grandmother lives in Brunswick, so she came to stay with us. And so for 3 days, I had my grandmother right there with nothing else to do but go through all photos with me. So that was great, because now I have a bunch of photos of those second and third cousins that I don't really know that well, and I know who they are when they're children, not just when they're, in their adulthood, as I have met them, through my life. As for Bibles, photo albums, anything else, I was probably the biggest nuisance to Chris's family saying, I need your photo albums, because I'm going to show you what we've produced on his side of the family, and that was a lot of work, but you know what? People are willing to share because they want their story documented. And then ask, who's the family historian? Who's the keeper of all this stuff? That is me. I'm the one with 2 fireproof file cabinets. So I'm the one. But somebody in your family usually knows all this stuff. All right, so I talked a little bit about online resources. So how many of you have either a MyHeritage or an Ancestry account? Okay. How many of you have been in it the last 6 months? Okay, well, that's good. That's good, because sometimes what happens is you start, you go, oh, okay, that's kind of boring, or you just get busy and forget. But these are both really good resources. As I said, there are plenty of others out there. I just use Ancestry, and so if you come to me, that's going to be what I can show you the most about. Because they have the little leaves, and I know you've seen the commercials, the little leaves are links to documents that may be tied to your person. That's how I found my grandfather's draft registration card, was through Ancestry. And I physically have a copy of it that I snapped and put in my files. So really great resources out there available at the click. There may be a charge, right? Because I think Ancestry's $99 every 6 months. MyHeritage, I don't think that initially there's a charge, and for Ancestry there's not a charge to set it up. I did find out from Rob that we have Ancestry.com available at the Genealogy Society. If you make an appointment with him, you can come and use it for free.
It's at the library.
I'm sorry, at the library.
We share the cost of the library.
Okay. So if you don't know if you want to put the money into it, and you want to just go set up a free account and maybe have an opportunity to go to the library every now and then and update files. If you do choose to not continue your subscription, you still have access to the work you've done. You just can't get to the new links and the new hints. So you don't throw away. That was my biggest concern, because I put all this work into it and I didn't want to lose my work, right? So they do keep your file. They do back up your file, so you have that second copy. And they have so many documents out there. Another thing that you can do is use Genealogy Software. And again, because I use Ancestry, I use Family Tree Maker. And it gives you the structure, the ability to put stuff in. You can tie photos, you can tie facts, you can tie additional documents. You can put directions to the cemetery where they're buried, if they're buried in the middle of the woods, like most of the people are in Georgia for some reason. I've been into the woods several times looking for that one graveyard. So if you don't document that down in there, you'll never find it again, right? Here's just an example. This is my great-grandfather. Of all the information you can put in where he was born, where he passed away, the children. So there's quite a lot of information you can put into his screen, and you can also then upload it to Ancestry.com because it does share. All right, so you've done all the work, you've got the big product. So what are you going to do with it? Well, you can do family charts. So this is a 5-generation family chart of his family. So this is the Outlaw-Outler family. Is this very attractive? No. It is just the facts, right? It's where they were born, where they passed away.
Is his name Outlaw?
It was originally.
I just thought you were being cute.
If he really wants to go change it back, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
I'm still a little touchy about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is just the facts, but that's a little boring. So we'll just kind of throw that one down. You can produce a book, right? So I know a few of you in here are published and have books that they've done on families, and so you can do pictures, you can just do the charts, whatever is available. So again, this is his family, the Outlaws.
Did you do that one, Rhonda?
I did not. No, this is Mr. Lanson's work. But now I chose to do a scrapbook. So my purpose in life when I did this was to get a picture of every descendant of Joel Thomas Outlaw. With the exception of 3 people, I have photos of everybody now. So you can do it in a scrapbook form. Now, I'm not a fancy scrapbooker. I'm kind of more just the facts. But it has who they married, who the kids were, and there's a photograph on this side, typically of when the parents were married, and then the kids when they were small. And then when the kids grew up and had their own family, they got their own page. So this is generational. So you can really choose different ways to put this information together. It's whatever makes you happy and whatever allows you to visit it and enjoy the work you've done. You can create a Facebook page. We have a Facebook page on my great-grandfather's side that we share photos, and so I've been able to snag some photos of 3 generations ago that I didn't have from the Facebook page. You can publish it to Ancestry and MyHeritage, and you can provide a copy to your local museum or library so that we can share it with other people. But now one thing I do warn you about, be careful sharing information about people that are still alive, because we have a lot of scammers out there. So usually if you're going to share that, I would start with the first generation that's passed, and then you can say, please see me if you want to see the current generation. But be careful, because if you put me out there, well, you know my mother's maiden name really quickly, right? And that's one of the first bank questions you have. Mm-hmm. So be careful sharing your information and try to focus that on people that are still, that have already passed, that they're not going to be impacted by that. So here's just a couple little funny things about being a genealogist, tracing your relatives. There's tons of cartoons out there. It's never done. That middle one is just really funny. It's never done because people are added and people pass every day, right? So it's really a lot of work to keep up a book such as that, and I can tell you that one's not up to date. I need to go back and do some work, but it's really great time invested. So if you want to make the journey, it's very rewarding. And you have so many stories to tell. If you start talking to the genealogist, they will talk your ear off about their family. Just wait till Miss Brenda comes in and ask her. She'll tell you. But it's a treasure hunt that doesn't require a shovel. So, you don't have to get dirty. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to be in the bog. So that's the information that I have about the genealogy research that I've done for my family. So what kind of questions can I answer for you? Yes, ma'am.
I have grandparents that came over from London, England, 2 different years.
Okay.
And I tried to research on Ellis, and I can never find the Bovington and the Greens.
Okay.
Where else did people from England come in? What other ports in the United States would they have?
So I'll tell you, when you're doing overseas research, that really becomes difficult. I was able to find, like for ours, that they came in through North Carolina.
Oh,
So you don't just come in through New York. There are other port areas you came through. The one thing that I can suggest to you is maybe buy a 1-month subscription to the Overseas Records and one of the online publications, like Ancestry has that. They have overseas, they have ships records, all that kind of stuff. Or you could go to the Bryan Lane Library because they have a bunch of ship record stuff there, and you might find your family, if you kind of have an idea where to look.
Okay.
But usually that's going to require you to get into an overseas database that is shared with one of the online companies. And there may be a slight subscription fee to that. Now, I will tell you, usually on a holiday weekend, I know Ancestry does this, and some of the other ones may too, they give you a 3-day weekend free to access to all the stuff. So have all your questions stacked up, and when Labor Day comes, just go get back and tell the kids, don't talk to me, I'm not picking this weekend, and just go bury yourself and do your research, because if you have your questions and you kind of can follow your trees pretty quickly, you can use a free weekend to really find a lot of information. Okay, someone else? Yes?
When people filled out the censuses, people lied about where they came from, or did they have to provide proof to the census taker? Sometimes like mine was Switzerland, and sometimes it says Austria or Germany for the state.
Right. So the question is, when they filled out the census, did they have to provide proof? No. And you also have to remember, particularly in the early census, not everyone was literate, right? Some people didn't know how to read and write, and all they knew was what they were told from their mom or dad or whatever. So they brought their history here and not really on a piece of paper. Another thing they weren't very good at knowing is how old they were. I've got one ancestor, the one guy that I'm really trying to tie back to that book. He was plus or minus 10 years in 3 different censuses. His obituary said he was 92 when he passes. I'm hoping that's the closest thing, because that's kind of the date I'm using. But they were not really good at knowing how old they were either, because it really depended on the individual providing that information. So unfortunately, you just kind of have to take it at face value and see if you can find another source to help corroborate that original information in the census. But still, the census is probably one of the best tools out there for the late 1700, early 1800 generation, just because that's, one of the things that everybody touched. And there was not anybody that didn't want to fill out a census back then. There was not the politics of it that we have today. Everybody filled it out. You can also find sometimes that your family member might have been in another household, that, a brother, or they might have gone to live with an uncle because he had a farm and there was work. So sometimes you figure out, Uncle James was over here working during that census because he was at Uncle Paul's house, So you might find where people migrated to just from the census. So unfortunately, we have to take it for what it's worth, because that's what they told the guy who was writing it down. And they just did the best to document what they were told. Okay, any other questions? All right, well, I thank you so much for coming. I could talk about this all day, so if you ever just want to spend an afternoon talking about it, just come see me. I do hope that you avail yourselves of our resources here. If there's anything we can help you with, I know we have other people in the back that will be glad to assist you as well. And if you want to talk about being a member of the Genealogy Society, please see him in the back of the room. He can help you with that. And y'all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you at the 3rd on 3rd on the 21st.
Okay.